Well, welcome, welcome, welcome to another Fearlessly Feral podcast episode. This is Reverend Karen speaking, and I have two guests today, two wonderful, lovely guests, which I am going to introduce in a moment after I do my standard introduction. So, welcome to Fearlessly Feral Living, broadcasting to you from the Woogie Ranch out here in the back 40 of northwestern Nevada, where I'm a half an hour away from the nearest gas station and the nearest grocery store. Our mission here at Fearlessly Feral is to provide a strong and unshakable inner foundation that works for long-term living. Our purpose is to activate inner self-awareness. And our vision is a world in which everyone lives wild and free. And we're actually going to talk about that movement today from our mission and purpose, which is kind of individualized and inward directed and individually directed, into the vision, which is worldwide. And my two guests today are, I think you're going to really enjoy hearing what they have to say, because they actually suggested this topic, a move away from the self-reliant individual and towards a place where we feel and know and are engaged in an active sense of collective responsibility. And I've made that transition myself, and it's been very interesting. And I have discovered that I need to have some balance in there. But I've also discovered that it was a very incredible and important move, a transition for me to make, if you will. And I know that not everybody is comfortable making that transition, because it can get kind of scary sometimes. It can get kind of frightening. So I'm going to introduce these two. We have Reverend Ryan Alexander. They are the co-founder and co-director of the Soul Evolution Collaborative, and it's a Centers for Spiritual Living Teaching Center. And they also serve as the Centers for Spiritual Living Education Manager. And they are all about social activism and wanting to create spaces of empathy and compassion and authenticity and belonging. I love that. Those are some of my most favorite words, by the way. And Reverend Dan Granda is the other co-founder of the Soul Evolution Collaborative. And he has a teaching center for the Centers for Spiritual Living. That's what it's called, the Soul Evolution Collaborative. I'm sorry, you guys, I'm trying to ad-lib while I'm reading here, and it's not working too well. So I'm going to.
You're doing great.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nailing it.
Yeah.
All the bullet points.
And I want to say just a tiny little bit about Reverend Dan, because at the Centers for Spiritual Living convention in February, I served on panels for ordination. And in Centers for Spiritual Living, we panel for everything. You have to panel to become a practitioner. You have to panel to enter ministerial school. You have to panel to enter your senior year in ministerial school. You have to panel to get out of ministerial school. And then when you go for your ordination, you have to panel again. And it's a pretty long process. And I sat on this panel, and I had already read his packet, which was quite extensive, and I had already been impressed. But as I sat there listening to him share in response to our questions, I found myself thinking, I want to be just like this guy when I grow up, because he was doing so many things in his ministry. And I was so impressed with that. And then I attended their workshop. Both Ryan and Dan did a workshop, and I attended this workshop, and I got even more impressed. So that was when I knew I wanted to have these two people as a guest on this podcast for you. So again, today we are going to talk about this being self-reliant and knowing thyself and individualization kind of thing. And, in Science of Mind, that used to be what it was all about. That's where I learned this deal and now I'm calling it Science of Mind 101. That's where I learned this deal. But now we've we've moved, we've progressed. Maybe, I don't think we've graduated, but we're up there in like science of mind levels 300 and 400, up in there, and maybe even higher. And we're moving away from that individualism to a sense of collective responsibility. And so I wanted to ask the both of you to speak to that, to how does one go about manifesting such a transition in their lives? And how does one find the balance or create the balance between the two? Because I know for me, it's important to maintain my individual spiritual practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my individual spiritual practice is what allows me to then move outward in the world. If I didn't do that practice, I don't think I'd have the courage to move outward in the world. So there's a lot of stuff there. So I'm going to turn it over to the both of you and let this conversation develop as it will. And once again, welcome. And I'm very glad that you are here.
Yeah. Thanks for having us, for sure.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I mean, where do we start? I mean, I know where I would start.
Yeah.
I mean, do you mean jump in, or do you want to?
Sure. Yeah, I have like 10 thoughts floating around at once.
All right. Well, I've got one,
go
so
ahead.
I'll start the thought. I think it's this movement from kind of this rugged individualism sort of idea that we've swam in for quite some time, and moving to a more of an understanding of collective responsibility. It's not an either or. I mean, very few things are either or, right? It's a both and. So there is both this, like you were saying, it's really important balance of, there is this idea that we do have to do our own individual work. We do have to set our own boundaries as individuals. We do have to move in ways and respond in ways that serve us, that support us. And so that inner work, that inner thing, that inner support, all the inner stuff that we're doing, especially through spiritual practices, it informs how we begin to live and move and interact in our relationships, in our community, in our world, in our, all the things. And so our individual understanding informs our collective responsibility. And so I think what's happened, I think you spoke to it, a few moments ago, about the science of mind was very inward directed, like, wow, I can create my own reality. I can do this, I can do that. Yes, and right? We are all creating reality. Like, my creation of my reality is not separate from yours. And so if something is in the experience of all of us, it's in all of our realities, right? And so it's like this understanding that we are creating not in a vacuum, that our actions, our thoughts, our beliefs, the ways we move in the world directly impact not only us, but everyone else. So it's really this movement. It's not a letting go of ourselves as individuals, but this idea that we don't have to go it alone. It's not solely up to us. We're not solely out here living on an island and all of our activities and actions just impact us, right? So it's this understanding, this kind of greater awareness. That's my first thought. And so there's many other thoughts, but I'm going to stop there because I know Dan has probably that same thought and then a little bit more.
That was definitely one of them, for sure. The other thought that comes up pretty prominently for me about this is, I think there was a lot of a really strong reason behind science of mind at the time. If we go back 50 years or 80 years or 100 years ago, I think there was a really good reason why the focus was so internally me. I think it became pretty prominent in the 70s and 80s, this whole codependency idea. And codependency, which has existed probably forever, but really came into prominence in the 70s and 80s, says I should have responsibility for you. And I think that's how a lot of our society has operated for a really long time in the United States, that I am responsible for you, for how I make you feel, for the reaction that you have to me and the things I do and the things I say. And so moving, on a spiritual level, moving away from, I'm not responsible for I'm responsible for me and my reactions, and you're responsible for you and your reactions. And I think it took us a fairly long time as a society, and I don't even know that we have all come around to that in totality, but a great number of us, and certainly within Science of Mind, came around to that idea like, oh, I can take responsibility for me. I don't have to take responsibility for my deranged family members or my boss or my coworkers or whatever. It's me and my experience. That's what I'm responsible for. And I think there is importance to that. And I think that's why we moved there. And to bring up one of Reverend Ryan's favorite topics, if we know anything about spiral dynamics, which is a way we had a class in school together on it. It was the whole
You
thing.
got it. You got to throw that in there.
Got it. Every chance I can. Spiral dynamics is basically one system of looking at the evolution of humanity throughout time, and there are different periods throughout that, throughout the evolution, in which there are different focuses, there are tendencies towards different focuses of humanity, and the post-World War II time period brought about a very a tendency towards like me and my experience, and for a lot of really good reasons. And I think that also went in alignment with Science of Mind at the time, and why it kind of took the focus it did towards, I get to create my experience. How cool. I'm not dependent on you. I can create what I want. And I think we stayed there. We have stayed there for a very long time. Whereas there have been 2 or 3 or 4 other evolutions since, tendency towards these other evolutions since, and one of them is we moved from responsibility for others into responsibility only for myself. And now I think we're coming around to, we have a responsibility to others, which includes me and my responsibility for myself within the context of the collective, right? And so if we look at like how this actually plays out, we used to live in small communities where people had to take care of each other, and yet there was a reliance on each other. And so then we stepped into, I don't want to be reliant on anyone else. And so then we all, really pursued the American dream pretty hardcore and went out, and everybody ended up replicating all of the same stuff. And so instead of like passing on the family house, all the siblings went out and got married and had kids and bought their own houses. Everybody had their own everything, right? We're all supposed to be pursuing our own careers and checking all the boxes and all the stuff. And what's happened, we've done, I'll say research. I don't know. We've looked into other people's research on
We've been
the
nosy.
impact.
We've been nosy.
We've been very nosy. But, the impact of that essentially is like this massive loneliness epidemic, because everyone in their own psyche has had to create and recreate everything that would have otherwise been the responsibility of the community that we lived in. And so I think we're at this point where we are coming back around culturally, societally, to the importance of we can't go it alone. We can't go it alone anymore. And I think one of the ways that has shown up in Science of Mind specifically is Science of Mind tended to attract middle to upper class white individuals. And throughout most of history, if you looked like us, yeah, you could probably say, I'm going to create my experience and then have that experience. Because it wasn't like we needed magic tricks to like make it happen. It was probably going to happen anyway, right? Mm-hmm. The more recent history, that's less and less true. And I think we're finding, like, we're having more people question the legitimacy of the teaching, like how we have taught the teaching. Yes. Is it really true? Is that really it? And well, yeah, principle is principle. How we have taught that principle might need to adapt a little bit and change and shift. And I think what we have found over and over is this shift from responsibility for others to a responsibility to each other, to others. And when we create, if we're creating in a vacuum, which we don't, if we think we create in a vacuum, there is no perception of how what we're doing impacts others. Right. And so if we're in a me and mine individual, rugged individual perception, we go and cut down the rainforest because who cares? That we can make it, we can sell it and make money, and not thinking about the collective, not thinking about generations in the future, not thinking about the impact on the whole. If we're creating in an environment where we recognize that we are not in a vacuum, where everything I create has an impact on everybody, everything else around me, and recognizing, me and my work. Like, I do need to do my personal work, but I also need to do my work not only for me, but so it doesn't bleed out and, impact all the other people around me. So I do think there is this big shift culturally that we are catching up with. I think it's happening.
Trying.
It's trying. It's trying. Yeah.
Yeah.
It reminds me, Dan, when you're talking, it reminds me of sorry to jump in.
No,
Okay.
go ahead.
Go for it.
That quote by Marion Greenspan, who's a psychotherapist, who coined the term intervulnerability, that we are intervulnerable. And what we mean by that is that we're so inextricably connected that I cannot exist without everyone else. Like that we are so, even beyond this understanding of interconnectedness, like even just deeper, we are so intertwined with one another in a way that we can't extricate ourselves from it. And so this intervulnerability, and she says it will be what saves us. Leaning into the intervulnerability is what will save us. Otherwise, we will destroy ourselves, right? And this whole idea that I have to do it myself, or I've got to get mine before you get something, because if I allow you to get something, I may not get enough, right? And it's this idea. And so she says that idea will destroy us, like plain and simple. But it's our intervulnerability that will be our salvation, which I think is just a beautiful understanding if we can like lean into that, right? I mean, wow.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Yeah, I like it. It feels good.
Yeah. Yeah.
What both of you are speaking to, what's coming up for me as I'm listening to both of you speak, is the principle of oneness.
Yeah.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Imagine.
And I started
Yeah.
developing this interpretation of oneness, that it wasn't just about how there's only one God and it's everywhere present, but it's also about how we are all connected on deep, deep quantum levels. And thus, yes, I am responsible to you, because what I say, what I think, and what I say, and what I do directly affects the rest of the world, and vice versa.
Yeah.
It's what Ernest Holmes used to talk about, the collective consciousness of the human race. And I love hearing the both of you speak about oneness in the terms that you have spoken about it. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And where I want to take us now is, do you have any tips or tricks or tools for moving from that rugged individualism to making a successful transition into being responsible to others rather than for others?
The first, I've got tips and tricks everywhere. But I think the first thing that I would say is to release this mindset. And I think this comes along with rugged individualism. I think the lie that we have been sold is that our productivity is our worth.
Yes.
And to release that mindset that I have to do, be, say, perform, produce, you name it, in order to be enough. And so if I am continually in that cycle, then I'm going to be continually kind of inward focused. I got to do this, I got to do that, I got to do that, right? So that I can be enough. And so for me, it is like this constant practice of realizing that I'm enough, that you are enough, that we are enough. Like I could like lay on the couch all day and watch British television, which I would love to do, and I would still be enough, like point blank. And so I think what happens is when we realize that we are enough, then we begin to release this frantic energy that perpetuates this rugged individualism. This, I've got to do this, I've got to get that, I've got to be this, I've got to get that degree, I've got to have this title, I've got to have this spouse, all the things that really keep us really inward focused. Because I think when we realize that we're already enough, and I realize that you're already enough, then our expectations of ourselves and one another kind of reaches this really sort of beautiful melding and communal sort of experience, because we're just living, just by the sake of living, moving, and breathing, we are enough. And wow, we could all breathe a little bit. And I think when we could breathe a little bit, then we could become more aware of the strength that we would have through one another in this interaction. That's one tip and trick. Dan, what you got?
Yeah.
That's one too.
I mine actually goes back to that idea of oneness, like literally the principle of oneness. And I think something else we talk about a lot is curiosity, remaining curious, asking curious questions, not pointed questions, but like being mindful. Whose thought is that? When I have a thought, like, where did I get that thought from? Is this really something that I believe and value, or is this something I've been taught or shown or told in my life? And I think, especially for those of us who have been like steeped in science of mind teaching, I think there's a difference between the principles that science of mind talks about and then the way it has been taught, like what we refer to as the teaching. I think they're actually different, right? And the teaching has a lot of jargony sayings and slogans and words that we sling around pretty frequently that I don't know that we've really taken the time as a movement to define and really say what we mean by it. And actually oneness is one of those things, because for I don't know. I mean, for years for me, I think probably decades for the organization, oneness sounds like it means one thing, but then in the context in which we use it, it's like the oneness of the things that are positive and good that I like, but not the things I don't like. And so the negative emotions, the ones we're not supposed to have, right? And the bad experiences and the what's in your consciousness, all that kind of stuff gets put over here. We have oneness, and then we have all the other stuff. And it's like, well, wait a minute. That's two things. You can't have oneness if oneness doesn't include all of the things. And so it's like developing a practice of pausing and really being critical, not judgmental, not like beat myself down, but just being critical of my own thoughts and going, curiosity, like what do I mean when I say that? Or where did that thought come from? Where did I hear that? Who said that? Is that mine? Do I know what I mean when I say that? Or is it just something I'm used to hearing and have been repeating? I think that can be a really powerful practice. And, having compassion for ourselves and, it's like when you become your own observer and you practicing objective thought, on yourself, without beating yourself up. Cause I think that's unfortunately really easy too.
Yeah.
And, I think too, like, I don't know that there's really any like one prescribed way to make the move, but I do think the more we get out in the world into uncomfortable environments, the quicker we will see the impact that me and mine and rugged individualism and self-reliance has had.
Yeah.
Right? Like when we stay in our comfort bubble, it's really easy to ignore that anything else is going on. But when we potentially look out of that bubble, and we do, part of rugged individualism is this desire towards comfort, I think, right? Like the American dream is like, how comfortable can you make your life? Which I don't think a comfortable life is a bad thing. I think we all deserve that. And not at the expense of everyone else.
Well, and on that line, Dan, like practically, how do we do that? We read authors that don't look like us. We watch TV shows with people's viewpoints that are different from our own. Maybe ones that we are like, oh my God, that's terrible.
Yeah.
But, right. And so we lean into those experiences because I have one life experience.
Yeah.
And so how can I begin to learn about my responsibility to everyone if I don't lean into understanding the experiences of others? I mean, we can never fully understand, but like I make it a point to read authors that don't look like me or don't have the same life experiences I do. Watching podcasts, same thing. Watching television, same things. Engaging in conversations, intentional conversations with people who don't believe the same that I do or have come to a totally different conclusion about life than I have. And so I think then we realize, oh, it isn't just about me. There's like 8 billion other people doing their thing, right? Out here in the world. And like, how can my life serve to support our collective life?
Yeah.
So that's some of the things that I intentionally do.
Yeah.
So we in our community, we host an annual online summit, and our summit last year was, oh, shift, my experience is not the only one. And it was I didn't even think about it until right now, but it specifically was all about taking a look into the experience of someone else. And we brought together, we interviewed, I think like 16 different people, 13 different people, who maybe shared, like if you looked at them, you might assume a lot of things, but their experience was often very different than what one might assume. And all kinds of different experiences of life that in their sharing just like blew the doors wide open. Like these were people we knew, and we got to interview some of them. And even the ones that I interviewed, I was like, oh my God, I had no idea. And I know you, I've known you for years, and I had no idea.
It was pretty cool.
It was really cool. It was really cool. But it just shows the power of taking a look into somebody else's life. And I think, in the world right now, you read headlines and they're so often bashing and othering specific groups without ever offering an outlook or perception into why, if that's true, why would that be true, right? Or like we get into like the generation war and like, oh, millennials, blah, 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 blah. Now, they're rarely are they talking about millennials are like 30 and 40 years old at this point, people. B, the bashing, it's like, well, but what created the scenario? Like we all created the scenario that thing is taking place in. And so I think it's really apparent when we look out into the world, just how frequently we are, looking through our own lens and not anyone else's, which is the whole me and mine and self-reliance, and my experience is the only one. And obviously everyone else would do life exactly the same way. So if they're doing something stupid like that, then, it takes the responsibility off of me for my impact on the world.
Yeah. Yeah. You're reminding me, particularly Ryan, when you said you read authors that don't look like you and you watch TV that is featuring topics that you wouldn't necessarily resonate with. Out here where I do live in rural Nevada. It's pretty conservative here. And I have made an effort, which makes me really uncomfortable pretty much most of the time, to go out and do things with people who do not think like I do. but
Mm.
we have one thing in common. We have one thing in common. Like one group of people I hang out with, we go out rock hounding. We hunt for rocks. It's the desert. There's a lot of rocks. We hunt for rocks.
Yeah.
Most of those people don't think like I do.
Mm.
And yet I feel I feel pretty comfortable with that group. There's another group I hang out with that I am not so comfortable with, but I continue to hang out, and I recognize that I feel uncomfortable there. And I show up and I do the best I can, and I try to listen with compassion and do that and be there and be that. And then something that does my heart really good, like you guys talked about the summit you did last year. About an hour north of me is a little town called Carson City. It's actually the capital city of Nevada. And there's a group of people there that once a month are sponsoring this thing they call L3. And I believe the three L's stand for living, learning, and loving, something like that. And once a month, they bring in a guest that is living a lifestyle that is different.
Mm.
And they encourage compassionate conversation and compassionate listening. And I've never been because it's an hour north of me, and the time they hold it just doesn't work for me. But I'm so grateful for what they are doing.
Mm.
And so one of these days I'll figure out a way to arrange things so that I can get there. And that'll be a big evening. Like, oh, we're going out tonight. We're driving an hour away, and then we're gonna hang out there for 2 or 3 hours and then drive an hour back.
Yeah.
But one of these days I'm gonna figure out a way to get there, and probably have somebody feed the horses for me is what it's gonna be involved. Yeah. Because I have horses. So there's things like that going on in the world
Yeah.
that just do my heart so much good. And that is what you guys are speaking to, is getting out in the world. And um it's 11:38. I do have another question for you. You've given us some tips about how to make that transition from rugged individualism to a more community-centered place. What does one do with those feelings of uncomfortability when they make that transition? And
Mm.
I'm going to actually take it even a step further, because there have been times when I haven't felt entirely safe doing what I'm doing,
Yeah.
not completely safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
It is definitely something that we talk about a lot,
yeah.
because
And
what
there's a
a
difference
privilege it
between-
is for me
Yeah.
to feel comfortable enough to walk into a space and think different than someone else, be different than someone else, whatever. Like I recognize that that is not true for everyone, and
Mhm.
I can't possibly know how not true that is
Yes.
for anyone, right? So I think there is a certain level of like, probably true for anything in the spiritual, any spiritual practice. Like, it's not gonna land the same for everybody. And I mean, to the extent that I received feedback once from, was giving a talk at a big event, and got feedback afterwards that I had asked everyone if they were feeling safe to close their eyes and join me in this little meditation. And some of the feedback I got afterwards was like, why would you ask us if it was okay to close our eye? Of course I'm safe to close my eyes. Why you got to bring fear into it? It's like, oh man.
There's a difference between comfort and safety.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And so I think what
Yeah.
this conversation is that we lean into discomfort because that's where growth happens.
Yeah.
But also within that, we also are aware of our own
Yeah.
safety, whether it's emotional, physical, mental, spiritual safety. So I think it's like when we're shifting in these sorts of things, we can't be so addicted to comfort that we don't move
Yeah.
because we know that's where growth happens. But also we have to also be aware of our own safety, like Dan's talking about. A lot of people, we have, traumatic experiences, past experiences, things that inform us feeling safe, and also being mindful of those things, but also not shying away when it's discomfort that is holding us back.
And I think our so here's the rub of all of this, I think, is as a society we bought into rugged individualism for so long and so hard. If it was going to work, it would have worked already for everybody. Right?
Yes.
And it appeared to work for some because it was couched in a certain light in a certain way. And so there were enough of us in the US, at least, who had bought into it long enough that it would be too painful to realize that we had been duped. And so we doubled down, which meant that we had to somehow reconcile in our own minds that we had been ignoring things for probably very long time, things that weren't working, things that were destructive in our lives, things that were unhealthy, all kinds of not great behaviors and thoughts and beliefs. And I think that has led us into practices of bypassing in large degrees, like major behaviors and belief systems in our world that, like, to admit would just be so uncomfortable. Like our body response would be like, that is death. To admit that would be death. It feels like death, whether it's actually going to be or not. I can't say it wouldn't be for all of us. For most of us, it's not going to be death. It might feel super uncomfortable, but our brain's like, nope, can't do it. We're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. We're just going to keep ignoring the thing, and it shows up. It shows up somehow. It's going to show up some way or another. It's going to manifest as something. And so I think we've developed a cultural avoidance of discomfort at a very subconscious level because of that, because it does perpetuate itself in a lot of different ways. And spiritually, specifically within science of mind, there is a massive culture of bypass because of the whole what's in your consciousness. I don't know, let's call it a movement here. There's a what's in your consciousness movement that's kind of existed of like, if you don't do it right, if your life isn't showing up right, if you admit that something's not working, it's like, well, what did you do to make that happen? And there is absolutely, whether we'll tell you till we die that it's not, but there absolutely is a blaming that happens when something in that version of the teaching, right, where something shows up in a way that is not supposed to, right? We kind of replaced one checklist of shoulds with a spiritual checklist of shoulds. And if you don't check all those boxes, well, what's in your consciousness? What did you do? And it's like, yo, we can't do this. So we avoid the discomfort of recognizing anything that doesn't look like it should look or is supposed to look. And so we do very often shy away from the uncomfortable. I mean, myself included, right? Like I'm not outside of that either. And so, yeah, just I guess to reiterate, Ryan, there is a major difference between uncomfortable and unsafe. And I think we have to learn, it may take a while to learn what the difference is, because oftentimes the discomfort feels like life-threatening, unsafe feelings.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Dan. Reverend Ryan, you've got any other words you want to throw out there before I
Final words. Oh, I get the last word. I love that. I love that. I think that it is this, I'm not negating that it is uncomfortable moving. I mean, not even in just not the context of this conversation, but anything that where we're moving from where we are to the next thing, where we're going to be or where we want to be, anything of that movement is going to be discomfort. So I think it's like just really getting really comfortable with the idea that there's going to be discomfort.
Yeah.
And this really supports the idea of our interconnectedness and our need for one another.
Yeah.
Because in that discomfort, if we're willing to sit in it just a minute longer than we think we can, then we come out on the other side of like, oh, okay, now I understand. And I think that we only are able to sit in that discomfort for just a minute longer than we think we can when we are in a setting we are leaning on the support of other people, of a community.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean like this hordes of people. It could be one person, or it could be a spiritual community, or it could be whatever. But I think it gives the importance that it's easier to sit in the discomfort when we're doing it together.
Yeah.
When we're all trying to navigate this together, that I don't have to sit in this discomfort alone, that I can be part of something. And in sitting in this discomfort, being the thing is the thing. We always talk about it. Being the thing is the thing, right? And so I think that for me is the really important piece of this, just sitting in that discomfort 1 minute longer than you think you can. And it is unbelievable what's on the other side. That is my last word.
And a wonderful last word it is too.
Yeah.
Unbelievable what is on the other side. I love that. Yeah. Well, I want to thank the both of you for showing up here and having such a wonderful conversation with me. It's been absolutely delightful. And I wanted to mention their website. It is, hold on, let me get it right. I pulled soulevolutioncollaborative.org. I will put their website in the show notes for you. If you go to their website, there's all kinds of yummy stuff on there. So go and check it out, soulevolutioncollaborative.org. And of course, my website is fearlesslyferal.org. And I thank you very much for living. Did you see that?
That too.
And
Yeah.
thank you very much for listening and living. I would
Yeah.
thank you for living. And just wanted to point out that Fearlessly Feral Living is a focus ministry of Centers for Spiritual Living. And all of the pertinent websites will be in the show notes. And I thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.